Hey everyone, it's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So in today's video, I'm going to show you a really simple illustration style where we make a sketch and then color it in with a kind of watercolor wash technique. And using that technique, we're going to paint this simple Totoro illustration from the film My Neighbor Totoro. So I've already got a watercolor paper texture loaded in here, and I'm using the Forester paper texture, but of course any of the paper textures would work well, even the regular paper texture that comes with the watercolor kit. Now for the brushes, I'm using the brushes from the regular watercolor kit, and as usual, I'll put links to everything I use in the description below. I've already got a rough sketch of the illustration, and you guys can have this sketch for free. I'll put a download link in the description. But I've just placed it here as the very top layer, and then I set the transparency mode to multiply. And that's because we're going to be painting underneath it, and by setting it to multiply, it'll make sure it doesn't cover up what we're painting. Now to start painting, I'll just grab a layer underneath the paper texture, just like you normally would. And I'm going to grab black, and I'm going to start by doing the outline. So I'm going to grab the HB pencil brush, and maybe at around 20% I think. I'm just going to basically sketch out all my lines here that I've already kind of done on this drawing, but I'm going to sketch them in a really rough kind of fluffy way. And hopefully you can see this on the camera, but I'm not doing a continuous line because this guy here is kind of fluffy. So by doing these short kind of messy sketched strokes, it's going to give the impression that there's kind of a furry texture. Now for the whiskers and the claws on the hand and the feet, I'm just going to do some kind of bold, longer strokes like this. Next, I'm going to zoom in there and do some of these face details, but I'll turn it sideways. It's just a little bit easier for me to draw this that way. And I'll draw the eyes in two halves. So I'll just do like a bold stroke kind of along the top half. And then on the bottom half, I'll do a separate stroke. And I just leave a little gap between those two strokes just because I like the way that looks. And I'll do the same thing over here. So for the pupils, I'll just kind of scribble them in like this. And I'm intentionally making them a little bit off center. And that's to make this kind of expression of this guy look a little bit kind of wonky, I guess. And if you remember in my kind of Iraville style tutorials, one thing that I realized is if you have a cute illustration, it looks really nice when you add a kind of sour expression. And I don't know why that is, but it makes the character seem more interesting. And then maybe I'll add a little kind of off-center, kind of frowny mouth like that. And it just gives this character a nice kind of contrast. Now the nose is really simple. I'll just fill it in like that. And the outline of the Totoro is done. And next I'll just move on and do the leaf. And I'm gonna do this all on the same layer. So for the leaf, because obviously it's a smooth edge, it's not like a fuzzy edge. So I'll do a bold outline like this, but I'm going to break it up a lot and leave a lot of kind of gaps. And I'm also sort of pulsing the pressure. So in some areas it's getting very thin and dry, and then in other areas it's kind of wider. And I'll just go along the whole edge of the leaf just like that. So there we go. All of the sketched outlines are done. So I can turn off the original sketch here. We don't need that one anymore. And to add some color, to actually start painting on the watercolor wash, I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to make sure it's underneath my sketch. So here's the layer with the sketched outlines on it, and then here's the layer where I'm actually going to paint in the colors. Now for the brush, I'm going to use a different brush than I normally do. I think in most of my tutorials I'm just using the abstract round, but I want to take this opportunity to show off the blotchy wash brush. It doesn't look like much in the thumbnail, but it's actually a really powerful and fun watercolor brush. And for the color, I'm going to grab a kind of dark medium blue color like this. Now it's important to kind of note that that brush, the blotchy wash brush, comes out a little bit light. So if I show that one off, you can see we chose a pretty dark color, but it's actually painting a little bit lighter than that. This is just the nature of this brush, so you have to keep that in mind when you choose colors. So using the blotchy wash and that bluish color, I'm just going to try to fill out the whole outline of the Totoro in one continuous brush stroke. There we go. And it's okay if it goes beyond the edges of the sketch because it's really easy to clean that up later on. Now the blotchy wash brush will get darker if you put multiple strokes on top of each other. So I've done this all in one continuous stroke. Now to add some shading, it's just as simple as going it over again. And just by that second kind of layer of color, it'll just automatically get darker. So I'm just going to add some darker kind of shadow areas wherever I think it looks good. Next, I'm going to change the color to pure white, and I'm going to increase the size of this brush a little bit more. And I'm going to try to do a couple of layered strokes on the tummy area just to lighten it up. And for the eyes, I'm going to do basically the same thing, but maybe at a slightly smaller size, and just do as many layers of this white as it takes to make those kind of white enough that they look like eyes. And for the nose, I'm just going to grab a kind of pink color. I think that's good. And I'm going to color it in at a really, really small size, just like this. There we go. So if you've gone way over the edges of the sketch here, like I have, I recommend grabbing the eraser brush and setting it to the fine liner pen and just using it to kind of cut back the color so it goes just to the edge of the sketch like this. So this one is almost done. I'm just going to add these chevrons here on the tummy area. So I'll just do a long press to grab the color from the body, and then using that blotchy wash brush again, kind of at a small size, maybe around 10%, I'll just fill those in. Now the Totoro is pretty much done, and I can move on and do the leaf next. So for this, I'm going to do the colors on a separate layer, so I'll make a new layer above the body of the Totoro, but still underneath that sketch layer. And for the color, I'm going to grab a kind of olivey, yellowy green color, and then using the blotchy wash, I'll just kind of roughly fill this out, just like I did on the body of the Totoro. So after I've done that first pass, I can go over it again and add some kind of darker areas. But I'm going to choose the dark areas versus the light areas based on the shape of the leaf. So I'm imagining the leaf is curved and then curved again. So that means I need a shadow here and a shadow here. So I'll show you what that looks like. And I've made sure the edge of that shadow exactly ends at the kind of center line of the leaf. And then for the other shadow, I'll add it down here. There, and you can kind of see how adding dark spots and light spots in certain areas can kind of suggest a certain form. Now in some cases, it's not blending exactly how you want. I'm kind of thinking about this area in particular. So you can still use the water blender. So I'm going to grab that one here at the bottom of the list. And I'll just go in there and kind of soften that up a little bit. Next, I can do the kind of stem of the leaf here. And I'm going to use the same blotchy wash brush that I've been using, but I'm going to use it at a really small size. And I want the stem to be darker than the actual leaf, so I'll choose a little bit of a darker version of that. There we go, and I'll just fill this out. And once again, just like I did on the body of the Totoro, I'm going to use the eraser brush to sort of cut back the color so it kind of lines up with the sketch a little bit better. Now the leaf is done, but I think I can add some interesting colors in there just to make the leaf a little bit less boring. And you could do that by just dropping in some other colors using the blotchy wash brush. But one trick I like to do a lot is to grab the selection tool, set it to freehand, and just make a random selection kind of across the painting here. And then I'll feather it out. Now when I go to hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer, I can actually shift the hue of that selection and just sort of drop in an interesting kind of secondary color. There we go, that looks pretty good. So at this point, this one could be totally done, but if you want to add some interesting lighting, especially kind of a dappled sunlight effect, I think I want to show you that next. So if you imagine the sunlight is coming in at this angle, then this leaf would be casting a shadow kind of on this kind of line. So I'm going to add that shadow with the selection tool, but first I'm going to make sure the body of the tutorial is selected. Then I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it to freehand, and I'll just make a selection that basically outlines where that shadow would fall. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer, and by just lowering the brightness here, I can kind of darken the body of the Totoro to kind of simulate the shadow effect. So that looks pretty good, but it did create a problem where the eyes became this kind of gray color. So I want to kind of bring the eyes back to pure white again. So I'm going to do that with the selection tool again, set to freehand, And I'll just select the face area like that. I'll feather it out quite a bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer. And I'll just brighten it back until the eyes look kind of normal again. Next, to do the kind of dappled sunlight effect, I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to drag it all the way to the very top here. It's still under the paper texture just like normal, but it's actually above the sketched outline. So it's way up here. And I'm going to grab a really light yellow color. And using that same blotchy wash that we've been using, I'm going to rough out some interesting kind of lines and shapes like this. And it doesn't look like much right now, but I'll show you what happens in a minute here. I'm just kind of dabbing this around. Now if I open up the layers panel again and change the transparency mode to add, you can see it does this really interesting thing with the colors where it sort of blows them out but also saturates them on the edges. So by default this effect is going to be way too strong. So I'm going to lower the effect by just lowering the opacity like this. So basically I'll lower it to almost 0, then I'll slowly raise it up just until the effect is just barely visible. And if you see in some areas it doesn't look quite right, this layer still behaves like any other layer and we can blend it. So as long as this layer is selected, I can actually grab the water blender brush, just like that, maybe a medium size, and just kind of blend out any of these areas that just don't look quite right. There we go, I think that looks pretty good. Now if I turn this off, you can see here's what it looked like before, and then here's what it looked like after. And this effect is really easy, but I know it's not suitable for every single project, but I think in this case it adds a really nice look, kind of an atmosphere. And there we go, this one is all done, and here's what it looks like when I print it out. So one of the things that I really like about this style is how the sketched outline leaves kind of more up to your imagination. At least for me, I feel like when I'm sketching, I feel like I have more wiggle room, like I don't have to commit to one clean, clear line. And that takes a little bit of pressure off, because you don't have to focus so much on making the outlines perfect, and instead you can focus on some of the colors and kind of experiment a little bit more. And that pretty much wraps it up, but as always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.